turning. Oh, there we go. Now the mute's off. All the tech problems are happening today. This is half the fun as we dive into a new year of events. My name is Jesse. Welcome to another exciting year of exploring by the seat of your pants. This is just our third program together of 2023 after over 500 sessions featuring scientists, explorers, conservationists, and more all last year. So I want to say a huge thank you to all you teachers for continuing to join in as we celebrate and showcase the coolest people and places on this planet. And I am so excited to help guide you through another incredible year of events. If you've checked out our newsletter at exploringbytheseat.com, you will see that we've got programs in Antarctica, Chile, live from the Philippines just this morning, South Africa, India, and more. It's just an incredible start to the school year, and I'm so excited you guys are all here to join us for the ride. Now, today, I am very excited to welcome in a first-time speaker with us, Erick Cedeno. So he is one of the Explorers Club 50 this past year, one of 50 incredible explorers celebrated for their work doing pioneering efforts to explore the globe, understand more about the world and people around us, and so much more. Now, Erick is the bicycle nomad. He explores the world on two wheels at 15 miles per hour, which his journeys have taken him across the United States, from Vancouver all the way to Tijuana and more, on adventures across the US. He's one of the world's leading bicycle adventurers, and today he is going to talk to us about a very, very special expedition over the last couple of years. So I'm going to turn it over to him in just a minute. We're going to sort out the tech together. I'm playing the presentation. We got some crazy stuff going on, but that keeps it kind of fun. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Erick. Thank you so much for joining us for the program today, and welcome to Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants.
I'm excited to be here.
You look like an excited guy. Like, you're our most energetic speaker we've had in a long time. So I'm thrilled to have you, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and play the presentation, bring this up full screen. You should be able to see this perfectly fine. I'll play it once we're good. You can see that, and we're set. Yes?
Yes.
Perfect. Let's do this thing and get underway.
So while you set that up, I'll start. My name is Erick Cedeno, known as the Bicycle Nomad. 14 years ago, I decided I wanted to see the US by bicycle. I wanted to see the landscape. I wanted to meet different people. I wanted to wake up every morning in different places. And I knew that the bicycle, because I love the bicycle, was the perfect method for me to travel the country.
Perfect.
But
I do apologize. We've got the slide deck here on the left. It's not like that for me. It's being the weirdest computer ever today, but let's dive in. Sorry.
No worries.
You let me know when you want next slides.
Okay. I'll let you know in a second here. So when I was in school, geography and history were my favorite subjects. And I wanted to combine both of them while I travel by bicycle. And I've done several expeditions retracing history around the country. But about 10 years ago, I came across one of the most amazing projects that I've never heard of when I was in school. And in 1897, the US Army was testing the bicycle as a method of transportation. And I just became fascinated. There were 20 Black soldiers that went 1,900 miles from Missoula, Montana to St. Louis, Missouri. And I wanted to learn more. And 8 years ago, I dived in. And please go to the next slide.
All right, I'm going to do this in a little bit of a different way. I'm really sorry about this. Let me bring this back up for everybody, and then we will be good to go once I've got this. Full screen for everyone. There we go. Entire screen, and share, and there we go. This should be a little bit better.
Yep. So I wanted to learn more. And one of the things that I first came across is this image where I saw Lieutenant Moss in the front and the 20 soldiers in the back. And I wanted to learn, where did they go? What was the original map? When I travel through history, I actually want to engage in the history of that route, of the original route. So I want to know where they camped, where they ate. I want to know everything. I want to experience what they experienced, weather pattern. So I realized that they had 3 expeditions. If you could go to the next slide. They had 3 expeditions. The first expedition in 1896, they went from Fort Missoula, Montana to Lake McDonald, what we know today as Glacier National Park. And that was about 150 miles each way, 300 miles. And it was about 8-9 of those guys. The following expedition, they went from Missoula, Montana to Yellowstone. And this is one of the pictures that I first saw of that expedition of 1896, where they went about 600 miles round trip, but they spent about 200 miles traveling inside Yellowstone. The next slide. And here is another photo. So I kept coming around. This is 8 years ago. I kept seeing photos of this amazing expedition, and I wanted to learn more. And if you could go to the next slide. This, if you're familiar with Yellowstone, this is what we call Old Faithful. And we had images of this expedition because they traveled with a journalist, which I'm so happy they did, because this journalist, he documented everything they did day by day. So I know exactly where they went, what time, and the weather pattern, what they ate, where they camped. And these images, I kept coming and I started building a folder of their experiences. And this is one of my favorite photos taken in 1896. If you could go to the next slide. When I discovered this expedition in 1896 and the 1897, I needed to, all I had were photos, but I needed more. And I came across what we're seeing on the screen. This is a journal that was taken by Lieutenant Moss. Lieutenant Moss was the one in the front of that first photo that we saw. He literally, and this is the 1897 expedition. So we could see on the top left, it says June 14, and all the way on the bottom, it says July 24th. And all across, day by day, I know exactly the condition of the road that they experienced, the weather pattern, how long they rode, and any challenges that they had along the way. And then I saw, wow, I have day by day what happened to them. So I knew that about 6 years ago, I knew I was going to retrace this route. And last year in 2022 was a 125-year anniversary from this particular expedition. But I needed to learn more, right? So I know what happened day by day, but I didn't know exactly where they went. If you could go to the next slide. I started looking into the library, and I went to Washington, D.C., where they have libraries where you could, the National Library, where you could see images from 1896, 1897 newspaper articles. And I came across exactly where they went because they had a journalist. He kept writing to different newspaper. And also when they were going into the towns, the journalists were so excited about what they were doing. Has never done before in the US. So it was something new that there was, people loved the bicycle. It was new technology in 1896. So I came across the newspaper articles and I kept reading what experiences they were having and comparing those with the journal that they kept. If you could go to the next slide. When I saw this at the library, this what got me really excited, because this was a piece of the puzzle that I needed to know exactly where they went. This map was the original map that they used in 1897 for that expedition from Missoula, Montana to St. Louis, Missouri. I could tell by looking at the map, the towns that they went to. There is a line that you see right in between. That line was a railroad track. I didn't know what that was until I started looking at newspaper articles and the journal, and I understood that they follow a railroad track. And the journal says that they carry food for about 100 miles, which is about 2 days, because they travel 50 miles every day, 50 miles every single day. And every 100 miles, the Army would drop off food, tires, chains, and any supplies that they need. So that's why they follow a railroad track. And the railroad track was always either left or right of them. And later on in this presentation, you will see some photos that I will share of my personal experience, and you will see railroad tracks, and that is why. If you look at the middle of this map, there's a shaded area, and that is Nebraska, just south of South Dakota. If you look at that map, that is the Nebraska area. I didn't know why they shaded that in the map. And when I was doing my research and I looked at their journals, I realized what that was. That is the Sand Hills of Nebraska, probably the toughest area for them to travel because of water and also the terrain. In 1897, there was no roads paved like what we have today. They were all dirt, gravel, mud when it rained, and that was very hard for them to travel. So, and it was very hard for me to travel this year as well, or last year in 2022 when I went across, because the lack of water and also the temperature was about 105, 108 degrees when they were traveling through that section. If you could go to the next slide. Are you able to play this video if you tap on it on the bottom?
Wow, that went wrong in a hurry. Let me pull this up and see if we can get that going. Let's see. Oh,
if you're not able, it's okay.
It's thinking about it. It wants to work.
Yeah, on the bottom, there should be able to.
Yeah, there we are.
You could play that video and put it on full screen.
Yeah.
I have so many amazing experiences along this way in this route. And as you see, it was raining, and all of a sudden I'm in this dirt gravel road, and these three horses, wild horses, came out of nowhere and they started following me. And those are the kind of experiences that you have when you said, you know what, I'm going to go outside my comfort zone. And what a beauty. I actually took that video because I thought that they were coming to take me out. I thought they were going to, they wanted to take me out of the road, but they actually just wanted to join me along the way. So that's why I wanted to show that video. But if you could go back to the presentation and.
Yep. Pulling that up. Just give me a quick second, Eric. Keep chatting around it, and I'll be right back with it as soon as it wants to work for me.
Thank you very much, Jesse. Thank you for doing that.
Sorry for the students. It's really like the most technical flaws I've ever seen in a program happen. My computer's just decided to freak right out today about everything. But it'll be up in a second as soon as it comes back up for everyone.
No worries, no worries.
That was spectacular. I love the look on your face when the horses are coming behind you. I'm just.
I was actually, I don't know much about horses. Now I do because of that experience. But when the horses came out of nowhere, I actually was afraid because they were breathing hard, and it's hard to tell on that video, but they were coming really fast. Yeah. And I just thought they're going to take me out of this road. And no, they just wanted to join me along the way. And if that cattle rail was not there, they probably would have gone all the way down. That happened in South Dakota, right in the border of South Dakota and Wyoming.
All right. Looks like we finally got it back up here. I'll bring this up for everyone. Sorry for the trouble, and we can keep going with the presentation. Here we are, folks. All right.
Okay. Thank you, Jesse. So as I mentioned, if you could bring it full screen there, that would be great.
Yep, we can do that. There we go. Okay, there we are.
Perfect. So as I mentioned earlier, the railroad was so important for them because that's how they got supplies every 100 miles. So every 2 days, they will go into different towns and the army would drop off the supplies for them and food. But also because of the roads, the gravel roads, kind of like what I was traveling when you saw those horses, there was mud everywhere because it rained a lot. They had to sometimes jump into the railroad and walk it or ride it because they couldn't move through the mud. But this is one of my favorite photos, because you see Lieutenant Moss in the front, and then you see the soldiers in the back. To the next slide. Like I mentioned earlier, it's very important for me when I travel through history to do it as historically as possible. I want to know where they went, where they slept, where they ate. So you will see the next slides, photos and experiences that I had that were very similar to theirs. So like I mentioned, geography was one of my favorite places, one of my favorite subjects in school. And I've always wanted to visit the Continental Divide. This is a section of the Continental Divide. And on the left, there is a photo that I found on a newspaper in Montana. And when you look at the right, that is almost the same area where I was traveling, crossing McDonald Pass at the Continental Divide. The next slide. I wanted to stay where they stayed. Some of the campsites that they stayed, and the forts, military forts that they stayed. This is Fort Harrison in Helena, Montana. They stayed in this particular place. And after 3 days from living in Missoula, Montana, when I got to Helena, Montana, I was welcomed at Fort Harrison. And it was one of the highlights of my trips, because now I'm at a place where they stayed. And it was very fascinating for me to learn what happened at Fort Harrison when they were there. And they stayed an extra day. They rested there. So the next slide. So you see, I was looking at places where they went on the railroad tracks. I wanted to see what happened in the landscape when they were traveling through the railroad tracks. But also on the right, I was very fascinated when I was reading the journals of the journalist and Lieutenant Moss. I found out that there was some wildflowers everywhere in Western Montana, in Central Montana as well. And I wanted to see what these wildflowers were. And I found them. They were literally everywhere. And it was great to see, because one of the things that I did not mention is they left on June 14 of 1897, and I left June 14 of 2022, 125 years later. They left at 5:30 in the morning from Fort Missoula, and I left at 5:30 in the morning from Fort Missoula. So I followed them day by day, mile by mile. So I kept seeing things that it was reported on their journals, and the wildflowers was something very special because it was everywhere. The very interesting thing, I went to a place called Ovando, Montana, and I spoke to a local, and I told them I didn't know anything about these wildflowers, but I told them I wanted to learn more because it was in the journal. And she said, we haven't seen these wildflowers for many, many years. It's the first time that we have seen them now for many years. So I'm like, oh, this is great. Very special to be able to see what they saw. The next slide. This location here, very interesting to me. To the left is the Grand Hotel. Really quick, when they were going through Big Timber, Montana, they saw there was a soldier. There was a soldier who's a retired soldier. He was in the tavern having a drink and some food, and he saw the 20 soldiers coming into the town, and he invited everyone to have a drink and also to have food. and those were highlights that they had in this location. I was able to find, because I was like, when I go to Big Timber, I want to know where they had some food. And I went into the place that they had, this restaurant called the Grand Hotel, and they have food right there where my bike is. So I love that experience. The next slide. This one here is in Livingston, Montana. And I love these pictures because I'm able to tell I could tell their faces. When I highlight their photo, I could see them smiling. They were very fresh. So I knew it was early on into the expedition, and I wanted to go to that place. And I was like, I hope those buildings, they're still there, but that's 125 years ago. The next slide. I had to colorize this photo because I am one of the work that I'm doing is I know everyone by name, but it wasn't, we're not able to tell who is who because it wasn't documented that way. 3 years ago, I've done the work that I want to make sure that everyone is recognizable by face and name. I also thought if this were my grandfather or my great-grandfather, I would like to tell everyone who they were. So I became very, they were like my grandfather, my great-grandfather. So that's why I'm here telling you their story. The next slide. I found the location, guys. Look at the buildings. So the buildings are still there 125 years ago, and I wanted to duplicate and the guy standing there. So I was very proud, just like him. So next slide. One of the work that I'm doing is I want to make sure that each of them is given the dignity that they deserve because it wasn't given to them. For me, these are like my heroes. I love what they did. It was very special expedition. In 1897, this was the story that the newspapers was telling everyone. And the St. Louis newspaper called this the greatest cycling achievement ever. Until this day, I believe that as well. And the guy there is Private John Finley. I'm able to recognize him. He's one of the few that I'm able to recognize. And I know where he passed away in Chicago. And when we went to visit him in the cemetery, we realized that he didn't have a grave marker. And so about 2 years ago, I started working with the veteran, with the VA. And at 10 months ago, we were able to put a brand new grave marker because, again, these are my heroes and I want everyone to know who they were. So he deserved that. The next slide. I don't know much about what some of those guys went in their head. I know when I'm traveling by bike, I'm thinking about my mom, my dad, my brothers. I'm thinking about the next meal that I may have. So I wanted to know what they went through, but we don't have a lot of that journal. But I do have a few quotes, and this is from Elwood Foreman. Elwood Foreman, to me, was the one that had the best sense of humor. And you could tell by some of his quotes. And everyone was at the campsite, and he says, there was no bicycle 100 years ago. Oh, I wished I lived 100 years ago. and that tells you, it's funny, but it's also serious because it was a very grueling experience that they had to go through, the mud, the rain, the snow. So that's what he was talking about, and everybody laughed. The next slide. That's Elwood Foreman. And again, to me, he's one of my favorites because he had a sense of humor. Every one of these guys had a personality, just like me and you. Some of them are serious. Some of them are, they love to eat. Some of them were like him. To me, has the best sense of humor, and it kept people laughing all throughout the trip. And I'm so glad that he was there. The next slide. This is some of the guys there from the Buffalo Soldiers, the 25th Infantry. And again, they're my heroes. The next slide. This photo I had to colorize as I'm working. This happened in Yellowstone, and I'm able to tell their faces. And this photo, I know exactly who those guys are by face. I know where they were born and where they passed away. The next slide. As this is the end of this presentation, but in every presentation, I like to leave with a call of action, and then we could read it here together. We have the responsibility not to just enjoy the outdoors, but to acknowledge those who inspired us and came before us. The reason of this project is to give them dignity, and that's why I want to name them by face. And I want the world to know who these guys were. So there is a quote that always stuck with me, and it says, "You die twice. Once when you physically die, and a second time when no one speaks your name." And that's why I speak their name. Thank you, everyone, for joining me.
Fantastic. Eric, thank you so much for such an in-depth presentation. What an exciting and unique journey to go on. This is not only very cool for you, but it's the first time we've ever featured anything quite like this in the broadcast. So what a special opportunity. And next time you join us in March, hopefully, we will have all the tech down, because some things happened today that I've literally never seen in 1,200 broadcasts. So we're all in this together.
That's what explorers do. We just have to adjust.
Now we've got a bunch of groups joining us in YouTube. We've got some live classes with us, a class that had to head off in advance. So Miss Painter's class, thank you guys so much for tuning in as well. We're going to head to YouTube really quick for a question. Then I'm going to head to DeWitt Middle School in a minute to start with our first question. So one of our groups online want to know that they cycle most places and think it would be a bit scary to have horses decide to run behind you. So they're a little alarmed by that. But they wanted to know, was it hard to ride in the railway tracks? Which was a question of mine. You look it looked complicated. How is that feeling when you're actually on the bike?
And that's what Elwood Foreman was talking about. It was so grueling, and I only did it for the experience. I wanted to see how that felt, right? I don't have to do that because now we have better gravel that they did and also better roads. But it was just for the experience, and it was really hard, and I don't recommend it.
All right, our lesson for wannabe cyclists across the U.S. DeWitt Middle School, Miss Maxwell's class. If you guys want to come on in, you're good to go for our first question. Hey,
all right, go ahead, Amelia.
What was the main thing that inspired you to keep researching and keep writing?
Yeah.
Can you repeat that question?
Oh, the main thing that inspired you to keep researching and keep writing. Was there anything that really jumped out specifically?
Yeah, to me, as a person of color, I think it was very important to tell the stories of who I was connecting and also my heroes. I have a son, and when I grew up in middle school and high school and college, I did not learn about them. So I wanted my son to learn about it and everyone else to learn about who these guys were, because I started traveling by bike and exploring about 14 years ago. But if I would have learned this in middle school and high school and college, I probably would have started traveling then in middle school, high school, and college, because it's such a beautiful way to travel. And I think it's very important to tell their story because it hasn't been told.
I love that answer. And it's really interesting. We have the chance in this program to feature a lot of people that do expedition by people power, whether it's rowing or walking, running, cyclists. And universally, everyone who does that finds it such an enriching and fulfilling experience to experience the world at that pace, where you have the chance for those conversations, that chance to go to past restaurants that people ate at, to stay where people stayed. And I'm really glad you shared so much of that today. Mr. Barron's class, Winnipeg, Manitoba. I'm going to come to you guys in just a second, but I'm curious, as you were on the road, and again, I love the idea that you set off at the same time, you got to experience the landscape as it changed. How did people respond to you in the various places? Like when you got to places, you're talking to media, you're talking to places that you're staying. How did people reply to, feel about that story as you're sharing that en route?
So a lot of people did not know about them. And that one location that I shared was just called the Grand Hotel, and that tavern where everyone was invited to eat. I went there and I was so excited to be at that location. That hotel has been there since 1890s. And so I went in there, very happy and proud to tell them the story, and no one knew about it, but they loved to hear about it because so much history has happened in that hotel. And I told them, I said, they got a free meal when they came in because there was a local that saw them coming in, and they were like, well, then we need to give you a free meal too. And so a lot of people did not know, but once they learned about it, they were really excited.
I bet. What a very cool thing. Mr. Barron's class, hopefully the audio is working. You can unmute your microphone, guys. And if you have a question, come on in. Hey.
Hello, I'm Lashley, and my question is, what was the most challenging part of your trip?
Yeah, most challenging part of your trip, Eric?
That's such an interesting question, and very insightful, because the whole trip was challenging. I don't know if there was, every day there was a challenge. There was never a day where it was like, oh, this was easy. And when I say that is because on that one picture that I was traveling through the Continental Divide, that climb was 12 miles up, and it never leveled. It was just up, 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 up for 12 miles. And that was very challenging for me. But then a few days later, I traveled through a section where there was no water, and I was thirsty, and that became a challenge. So I'm not sure. I think it's just, and that was the beauty of traveling by bike. I think if I would have done this on my own, I'm not sure if I would have been able to continue. But because I was following a historical route, and these guys who I'm paying homage to, they did it. So I have to do it because they went through the same experience that I went to. And that's why I love to travel through history, because I feel like they encourage me and motivate me to keep going, because they went through the same challenges. But if I had to pick one, in Nebraska, which is the same section that they went to, last summer was really, really hot. And throughout Nebraska, it took me about 8 or 9 days to travel across Nebraska. And every day was about 105, 108 degrees. And traveling 50 miles at that temperature was very challenging.
I would say so. It's really interesting. Again, we get explorers that handle rain, extreme cold. Extreme heat is the worst thing, but there's really there's not much you can do. You can try and cool yourself down. You can jump in a pool if one happens to be there, but you're en route and you've got to keep going, and you're on this expedition, and you sort of make the best of a very challenging situation. So thanks for sharing that. Speaking of challenges, I'm going to head back to DeWitt in just a minute for another live question. But with the bike itself, what kind of bike do you have? And did you have to repair it en route? Do you have to go to any bike shops? And I'm curious how that relates to the experience, if it's even written about, of the original bicycle expedition. Did they have big problems with their bikes? Did they bring along spares? How did it work?
Yeah, so let's talk about the original route, the 1897 expedition. So every 100 miles, they would drop off tires, chains for them. And that one guy who I shared, his name was Private John Finley. He was the mechanic of the expedition. Only one guy was taking care of 23 bikes. And for me, he was one of my heroes, because at night he would not sleep. Well, he slept like 3 hours, 4 hours, but he will have to get up before, because they left every fifth day. They were traveling 50 miles every day. They only took 2 days off. And he had the pressure of making sure that those bikes were fixed and ready to go every morning. So he would sleep 3 hours, 4 hours, and was working while the other guys were sleeping. He was fixing their bikes. And I learned that they had about 15 flat tires along the way, which it was not bad for a group of 23 bikes. They only have 15 flat tires. And an interesting note is that those bikes in 1897 did not have gears like what we have today, and the technology has changed so much in 125 years. Those were what we call single speed, no gears. And that was very challenging for them to go up the hill and down the hill and through mud. And so those guys were, for me, superhuman. Myself, I've been traveling by bike for many years. And one of the things that I tell people when they want to travel by bike is to learn the basic mechanic on how to fix a bike, how to fix a tire, how to fix the chain. So you're kind of self-sufficient and not having to depend on people or stores or shops along the way, because there's times that you're miles and miles and miles away from those shops. So I had a total of 2 flat tires along the route, but I didn't have any mechanical issues along that route.
Well, good for you, and that is truly an amazing stat that there's only that many on the original expedition. Like, that is astonishing to me that there must be the best riders in the world. And I love these like modern day exploration comparisons back to the old days where everything was uphill both ways in the snow, and they had this way terrible gear compared to what we have nowadays. And I think that adds so much to the historical context and the comparison of journey. So thank you for that.
But we did experience similar weather pattern when they traveled. Luckily for me, I didn't deal with snow, but they dealt with 2 days of snow in Montana, even in June. So, and some of the Canadians will know
this
that.
is a terrible tourism ad for Montana, but good to know. DeWitt Middle School, we're going to come back to you guys. If you have a second question, come on in. Hey.
What was the biggest obstacle you overcame when riding or when traveling?
Ooh, biggest obstacle you overcame while riding or traveling?
Biggest obstacle is always food. There was a section of Nebraska as well, and I love Nebraska. I love all these states. They were they're beautiful, and all of them are very diverse in their geography and their landscape. But the towns are so far apart, so I didn't have enough food. And one time I ran out of food. And I was like, what am I going to do? And I went into a grocery store and I couldn't find much because I'm plant-based, I'm vegan, so I couldn't find much to eat. And what I did was I just bought a loaf of bread, some peanut butter and jelly, and I made a couple of those sandwiches. And peanut butter and jelly is always my to-go when I'm on those expeditions.
We've had
That's a good question, though.
Peanut butter is the best. It's like the ultimate trail adventure snack. Chocolate seems to be a really big theme too. Basically, a Reese's peanut butter cup. Like, you're set, like anywhere in the world.
Guess what's my favorite sandwich? Peanut butter and jelly, and then hash brown, all inside.
Ooh, I've never had that. We'll call that the Erick. We'll pitch McDonald's after this is done.
Actually, there is a restaurant in Ovando, on Montana, called the Straight Bullet, and because I went there at night and had that sandwich, and in the morning, so they left. When I was leaving, they said, we're gonna call this the Bicycle Nomad sandwich. So yes.
Okay, I'll have to go. You send us the town name. If we're ever in that place in Montana, we're set. The Straight Bullet, that's a riot. Mr. Barron's class, Manitoba. Time flies and you're having fun, Erick. We got a time for a few more questions. I'm gonna head back to our live class. Winnipeg, if you have a second one for us, just unmute your mic and you're good to go. Hey guys.
What is the total distance that you have traveled?
For this expedition or for his whole life? What do you want, or both?
For his expedition.
Okay.
So I'll do both, right? So for last year expedition in 2022, that was 1,900 miles and took 41 days to complete, which it took the same time to them. So I wanted to start when they started at 5:30 in the morning, and they arrived in St. Louis, Missouri, at a place called Forest Park, which is so beautiful and one of the most beautiful urban parks in the U.S. And they arrived there on July 24th at 6 p.m. That took us 1,900 miles. Total for my 14 years of traveling by bike, I've done over probably 60,000 miles.
Wow. I'm trying to find, so for our kids in Winnipeg, 1,900 miles is about 3,000 kilometers, and that's the equivalent of like Winnipeg to Quebec City by bike, which is ridiculous. It's like an unfathomable distance. Good for you. And that's one expedition in 40-something days. Holy.
And then 60,000 kilometers, how much is that?
Crazy. 60,000 miles is in kilometers, 100,000 kilometers. That's like the whole Earth, like what? At least two times, at least, maybe more than that. Crazy. Erick, you're quite the guy. So as a teaser, I mean, we had this chance to do a deep dive today. I want to stress too, there's some spectacular stuff online. IamBicycleNomad.com if you want to learn more about Erick. His Instagram page is spectacular. And specifically on this expedition, the CN Traveler article. I'll make sure all our classes have that. I'm going to put it in the chat for folks in a second. But Erick, is there any spoiler teaser you want to share with us about some of your other expeditions to inspire our kids to go out and get on their bikes now that we're done this broadcast? Anything to hold with?
I love traveling by bike, and I like to share this experience with as many people as so you could have the same experience that I have. I love history, but you don't have, if you like history, travel through history, and you don't have to do a long trip like I did. You could find places around your area where you live and go visit those places by bike and then go back home. That is one way. I also love bird watching, and I love traveling by bicycle to different places to listen to bird sounds. So just combine the love that you have with traveling by bicycle, and you will see how much you will enjoy the experience and the lifestyle of traveling by bicycle and exploring.
What a beautiful message to leave on. Erick, this has been so much fun. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it as one of our kickoff presentations of a really exciting year. Cannot wait to have you back. I encourage all our classes to check out Erick's website, his Instagram page, and more. On YouTube, by the way, we wanted to note this came from one of our YouTube classes as it speaks to your thing before we wrap up. So you've inspired some birders to go out biking, which is a fantastic, I think, thing for the program. And what we do to end every broadcast, Erick, I'm going to bring in our live classes today. A big thank you and farewell. So DeWitt Middle School, Mr. Barron's class, join me in saying a big thanks. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a